And as we are looking ahead to later this morning when the Commander-in-Chief will speak at the United Nations General Assembly, we want to bring into the conversation none other than political analyst and historian Rich Rubino. Rich, good morning. Always a pleasure.
Good morning. My pleasure as well.
So set the stage for us. For those that are unfamiliar with the United Nations General Assembly, why was it created? Why is it important to American and global affairs?
Well, it was basically created as World War II was ending, so that there prior to the United Nations, they had the League of Nations, which the United States is actually not a part of. That Woodrow Wilson could not get the United States Senate to ratify the Treaty of Versailles. But basically, the League of Nations was seen as kind of feckless, so they were looking for a new institution. So there was they went to San Francisco, leaders from all over the world, and they created a new body with basically the objective of world peace. They decided they were going to build it in New York because of a generous donations from the Rockefeller family. So they basically bought a building in New York City, and other countries agreed that it would be in New York City, which is seen as kind of the hub, if you will, of the international community. So they met there, and then basically that's why it began. And then a couple of years later, during the Korean War, it was the United Nations that very much supported the South Koreans after the North Koreans have invaded the South Koreans. But that's basically why it was established.
Rich, we saw yesterday as global leaders arrived for that 80th anniversary ceremony, which got underway, and then those high-level talks expected to kick off today, slated for 9:45 this morning Eastern time. That's when the Commander-in-Chief is expected to address the UN General Assembly. A lot of speculation around what he could discuss. Obviously, conflict in the Middle East and the Russia-Ukraine conflict are top of mind for many viewers.
Yes, absolutely. And currently, there is a movement to recognize a Palestinian state. So there are 193 nations who are a party to who are currently members of the United Nations, and 147 of them believe that there should be a two-state solution and have recognized a Palestinian state. They believe that there should be a Palestinian state, or a two-state solution, if you will, a Palestinian state, which basically would be the West Bank and Gaza living side by side with Israel. The United States is not one of them. The United States, led by Donald Trump, believes that that the establishment of a Palestinian state would be awarding Hamas. That's the argument that Donald Trump is making. So the United States is very much in a minority, but countries led by France, led by the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, are leading the movement, and they're actually going to have a conference on how to establish a Palestinian state. But that's really been a thorn in the side of President Trump. If you might remember, the British Prime Minister, Mr. Starmer, came to the United States last week, and they were asked at a joint press conference with Donald Trump and the British Prime Minister about a Palestinian state, and Donald Trump said, this is basically a point of contention. This is where we disagree. So that's going to be a very important issue. The other issue, obviously, the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, that will continue to be an issue. Donald Trump says he's looking to try to come up with a solution for the conflict, but those will kind of be the two kind of main issues.
As it relates to American policy, we know the topic, quote, American strength is something that the Commander-in-Chief will emulate and, of course, express there at the United Nations General Assembly. How important is that? And then if you can relate it to NATO, because a lot of people are comparing and contrasting it to that as well.
Yes, Donald Trump takes a different approach than pretty much previous presidents, all the way going back from President Truman all the way to President Biden. Basically, every president except for Donald Trump has been somewhat of a supporter of the United Nations, some of them more incredulous than others. George W. Bush, for example, was known to criticize it, but generally he supported the mission of the United Nations. Donald Trump is somebody that is not much of a supporter of multilateral institutions. Multilateral institutions that basically came at the end of World War II. One of them is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. The other is the United Nations. He would rather work on bilateral agreements, meaning that he would rather work on agreements between the United States and other countries. I think part of the America First movement, I think, is that basically America should look. This is what Donald Trump's argument. Mike Waltz, the new UN ambassador, talks about making the United Nations great again, but they basically want the United States to make agreements with other countries directly. They don't want necessarily to be a party of the multilateral institutions. This is very much a break from most United States presidents, most United States Congresses. It was something that was seen as kind of a fringe movement until Donald Trump became president. Now it's become more or less the mainstream of the Republican Party and of the contemporaneous conservative movement.
Rich, many people wanting to know what happens following the high-level talks. They're wanting to know, is it just talks or does action follow behind it?
Yeah, usually they are just talks. Usually you have world leaders coming up and delivering speeches. But usually there's not much actual substance. The actual substance gets down with the nitty gritty with the countries meeting. I think that there will be some substance when they have the conference on the Palestinian state, which Donald Trump will not be a part of. There will be some drama here because the president has actually denied the visa of Mahmoud Abbas, who is the head of head of the Palestinian or the Palestinian Authority, which this is the organization that was once led by Yasser Arafat, which the United States has been allied with, and actually, I think the United States hoped that the Palestinian Authority or Fatah would have won the election in 2006 over Hamas that time, but they didn't. So it's very interesting that Mahmoud Abbas will actually be addressing the United Nations via Zoom rather than actually being there. But it's going to be it should be very contentious. The United States is definitely going to be on the other side of the Palestinian state of countries like France, Saudi Arabia, and the United Kingdom.
Political analyst and historian Rich Rubino, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for breaking down what we can expect and what could follow. Anything else you'd like to add before we let you go?
No, I would just add that this is as once again that Donald Trump's basic Donald Trump's ideology is one that the United States should not be a party. It should not really worked in terms of being part of a multilateral institutions. He's really redefined conservatism. This was what conservatism, I think, was in the days of the 1920s, in the days of Harding, Coolidge, Hoover. I think there was Robert Taft, who ran for the Republican nomination in 1952, had a similar ideology. But once Eisenhower won in 1952, every Republican president, every Republican Party nominee, with the possible exception of Goldwater in '64, was basically a supporter of the United Nations. So this is really a radical departure, if you will, from most Republican and Democratic presidents.
Rich Rubino, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. And I want to share with you the very latest from Rapid Response 47 on X this morning. Take a look at your screen as they do report that the President of the United States did arrive in the Big Apple for the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. They go on to say where he will deliver must-see remarks in the morning, then hold meetings with world leaders. So you might be asking yourself, okay, Gina, what time is everything kicking off? I'm glad you asked. Take a look at your screen. My producer providing a very detailed breakdown of the timeline as you plan your day with us here on Live Now from Fox. So coming up this morning, Eastern Standard Time, of course, at 9:45, that's when President Donald Trump will give those opening remarks at the United Nations General Assembly. Of course, give or take a few minutes. As we know, a lot of these things do not start on time. Then at 11:10 this morning Eastern Time, the president will participate in a bilateral meeting. Then a second bilateral meeting slated for 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Then later this evening at 7:20 p.m. Eastern Time, the president will give remarks at the United Nations Leaders Reception. Of course, as you all know, if we get cameras inside and we are allowed to feed, you will get these events in full right here on Live Now from Fox. Of course, giving you that beautiful shot in the Big Apple. As we know, New York City is the location of the United Nations General Assembly.